Right. Then the second part is you need to know the types of variation. And we know that we subdivide variation into two types.
Yes.
We have what we call a continuous variation as well as this continuous variation. Now, I want to make an example here of height. Height is a characteristic, ne?
Yes.
Of gender, and it's also a characteristic. Why are we saying height is a characteristic? That's one, because it is controlled by what? By genes. And we have two alternative forms of what? Of genes that code for what? For height. We have two alternative forms of genes that code for what? For gender. So for height, we have tall as well as
Short.
For gender, we have male as well as
Female.
female. So this one, we call them what? Alleles. Remember, the alternative forms of what? Of genes. So if we say tall, this one is an allele. If we say short, this one is an allele. These are two different forms of gene that code for what? For height. Now, if you look at these two characteristics, characteristic X and characteristic what? Y, these two characteristics are different. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
One thing that I'm going to say is height. This one is a type of characteristic that is what that can be measured. Quantitative, yes. This one, gender, cannot be measured. So since height can be measured, what type of characteristic is height? This one is a quantitative. It can be quantified.
Yes.
Right. This one is
Qualitative.
qualitative. And if we say characteristics are qualitative, these are characteristics that is what? A fixed form. There is no intermediate form in between. Like in this class, we have what?
Males.
As well as
Females.
there's no other form in between. In other words, these characteristics, they're actually what? Fixed. But this one, quantitative, they have a whole range of forms. What does this mean? In terms of what? Of the height, we are going to record different varieties of what? Of height. In terms of height, we are going to record what? Varieties of what? Of different what? Height. Like for example, in this whole class, you can have some people that are actually 3 meters, 5 meters long, 7 meters long, 10 meters long, 15 meters long, and so forth. Then you can tell that there's a whole range of what? Of form. A person who has a tall feet and short feet. Tallness is different. In terms of what? Of the measurement. Shortness is also what? Different in terms of what? Of the measurement. That's why we say these are characteristics that have what? A whole range of forms. But this one, they're actually what? Fixed. You understand that? And quantitative characteristics, very important. They determine what? Production. They might ask you the type of characteristic that determines what? Production. The answer is quantitative. Qualitative characteristics doesn't have an impact on what? On the production. For an example, if this one was actually what? Height of sugar cane, the longer the sugar cane, the more productive it is. Because the more you are long, the more segments. Because if you want to actually break the sugar cane, you work on what? On the segment.
Yes.
9 are 4 segments, C2. So remember how many? Two. But you have more long, the more the segments are coming together, isn't it? Therefore, that's why we say this one determines what? Production. Another characteristic, milk production. Another characteristic, egg production. Another characteristic here is chicken, head, corn. Milk production is quantitative. Can be quantified. Can be measured, isn't it?
Yes.
Can be measured in what? In liters. Can be measured in milliliters. fetus. So this one is quantitative because we have a whole range. But if you want to actually subdivide and put what Alex, different forms of genes that code for what for milk production, we'll say we have animal that produce what high milk production and animal that produce what low. But the low milk production has its own quantity. The high milk production is its own what quantity. So we say all characteristics that can be quantified, that can have what a degree of measurement, we say they're what quantitative, and all of them determines what? They determine what?
Production.
Even eggs, we have high laying animal and low laying animals. So the one that actually high layers, they can produce or they can lay plus or minus 100 eggs a day. But this doesn't guarantee that if they say high, you mean 100. There's actually what varieties in terms of what the number of eggs produced by each animal. So once we have a complete range or a whole range of forms, then we say that particular characteristic is quantitative. Chicken head core. Chickens had what? Only 4 head core. So once you see an egg, Masha, we should know that the chicken that will evolve from that particular egg will have either of the 4 chicken head cores. So what the chicken head cores was? Yes. Brazilian yeah, small hawks. So one is again into what? 4. There's no other form in between this 4. Meaning that character is what is qualitative and doesn't have an effect on what on the production. You can't say all the animals that have a rose-shaped chicken head core, they are highly productive. No. This one doesn't have what an impact on production. Gender doesn't have an impact on the production. You understand that?
Yes.
Now, if you look at gender, this one is a characteristic that is determined solely or mainly by what? By genes. Does the environment have an impact on gender?
No.
Does the environment have an impact on gender?
No.
You can't say exposure to the type of food that they're eating determine if your baby will be a boy or a girl. Never. What determines gender is what? Is genes. The Y chromosome. The Y chromosome is the only chromosome that determines what? Gender. That's not going to determine gender. Gender is not determined number 1. Our letter X, what about you? Our letter Y, what you? So that's a genetic factor. So all qualitative characteristics are determined mainly by what? By genetic factors. You understand that? But quantitative, they are actually determined by genes, or sometimes they are also determined by what? By environmental factors. Like milk production. We know that milk production is determined by the amount of feed and amount of water taken in by the animal. You still remember that on lactation?
Yes.
Milk production is determined by what? By the amount of water and the amount of feed taken in by the animal. If the animal gets large amount of what? Of protein-rich feed, we know that this one will increase what? Production. But if the animal gets less amount of protein-rich feed, this will affect. And nutrition is an environmental what? Factor. Milk production is determined by what? By nutrition. That's an external factor. And there's no gene that actually controls what? Egg production. That's why we say quantitative. Most of quantitative characteristics are determined by what? By environmental factors. But qualitative characteristics are determined mainly by what? Genetic factors and genes. Are we clear? So with all of this, I was actually explaining continuous and discontinuous variation. The key word on discontinuous variation is this is a type of variation that is determined by characteristics. That is what? A fixed form. Then, if they say fixed form, that simply means there's no intermediate form in between. If it's not a male, it's a female. Continuous variation. This is a type of variation in which characteristics has a complete or a whole range of forms. The keyword here is whole range of forms. Here is what? Fixed form. These are the two types of variation that we are having. The next thing is the importance or the significance of variation. Importance of genetic variation. I remember mentioning this because this one is one of the main important process in molecular